There's a lot of ways of making money in real estate. A lot of ways of making money. The ways I make money in real estate are relatively passive too. But I've also transitioned a lot of my focus away from the long-term landlording into more of the short-term rental space. And I've identified two ways in the past couple of years that have worked really well for me on making money in those spaces fairly passively. Now, it still requires proactive effort every week and often every day, but it's a very minimal amount of time. I'm committing literally minutes, not hours, to do that. And I can do it from anywhere in the world, which makes it a lot more appealing to me because when I make financial decisions, I'm always starting with lifestyle. Does it connect with who I want to be, my values? And part of my priorities include, geographical mobility. When I was asked a little over half a dozen years ago, probably 8 years at this point, what I really wanted in life, right? If I had a magic wand, what would I be doing? Similar questions that I want to know from you because it helps you break down how to invest your time and subsequently your money as wisely as possible to end up doing what you want. I had a tough time answering that question, but what I could summarize it as was go anywhere I want, whenever I want, leave when I want to, stay as long as I care to, and I wanted to be able to have the financial means to be as generous or selfish as I wanted and not worry about price tags. And I've since sort of landing on that high 20,000 foot summary of my own personal depiction of a lifestyle, I've concluded everybody falls into that same camp. In some cases, it might be more local. For instance, with you, you've got 3 kids. You may end up as a grandfather wanting to go to your grandkids' soccer games every week. It may not mean traveling to Spain. Maybe that's where I want to end up. But it's some variation of going when you want to, wherever you choose. And having that freedom of time, freedom of choice. And that's really the benefit of cash flow. So for me, I really had to understand that priority in order to really narrow my focus on ways of making money that would afford me the ability to do it. And I think when you're making great financial decisions, it's imperative that you understand exactly who you want to be, what you want to be doing, because so much of these side hustle type of revenue streams are going to conflict with what your list consists of. And if you can narrow it, then you can run to those deal breakers and say, okay, I couldn't do small handyman electrical work in my local area and still get paid if I want to be away. That would conflict. Therefore, that type of revenue stream would be an instant no for me. Might be perfect for you. There's no right or wrong. It's just, does this work for me or does this not work for me? It's a question that needs to be answered as you're considering various ways of maximizing your wealth development. I've also learned over many years of doing this that very few people want to sit around and do nothing. Having meaning and purpose in life is very important. And if you can generate revenue while you're doing that, even better. So I try to find things that I'm really excited about that I can make money with. But I always prioritize earnings potential secondly. And the second priority as far as a prerequisite is I have to be able to recognize at least a 7-figure upside potential with what I'm doing, meaning at least $1 million a year. Now, it doesn't mean I'm going to get there. I may dabble with it for a while and realize, this just isn't for me. For instance, with you and being an experienced electrician, it'd be feasible to think you could actually start a company that offers electrician services. You could scale it out. You could develop a team. It doesn't sound like that's what you want because, of course, you don't want the responsibility and having employees and checking up on folks and babysitting the project. So again, it doesn't make sense, but that would be an example of being able to see an upside potential of at least 7 figures. There are plenty of electrical companies that are $1 million companies. So I have to be able to see that mathematical potential in order to consider something before I'm going to invest my time and money into it. But I would start a pros and cons list. I believe the guy that wrote The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F, right? That book is very well read. I think sold tens of millions of copies. Bestsellers list for sure. And I remember him, Mark Manson, I want to say his name is, came up with a way of deciding on things, how you're going to actually spend your time. And I like how he broke it down into both long-term and short-term. And being able to create pros and cons list for both short and long-term. I think a lot of people make impulsive decisions. I'm very guilty of doing this myself without necessarily understanding what the impact would be over the long run. I did this professionally too, where I invested so much money and literally a dozen years of my time building out a business that, you know, by the time I hit that 12 to 15 year point, I was so burned out and despised it. I did not want to wake up anymore and go to that job. It felt horrible, and maybe similar to what you're feeling right now with your current W-2 position. I dreaded it, you know, and I began sort of looking back and wondering, had I made just a series of mistakes that kind of led me to a place where I wasn't really getting what I wanted. And so I think being able to recognize the best approach to how to spend our time early gives us an opportunity to avoid regret down the road. And, you know, life is about creating as little regret as we can. And I would say that being able to really pinpoint where it is you want to end up, and then taking those ideas that you can come up with on a test drive to explore whether or not it's something that you actually are interested in, is an extremely valuable exercise to be able to do. This is something I've done with businesses, more and more as time goes on. I don't want to end up 5 years down the road and look back and say, what the hell was I working on here? This is a nightmare. How do I unravel this and get out of it? That's the last thing I want. So what I'm trying to do is maximize my upside potential, but also reduce my risk. And I don't believe that they coincide. I don't think that you have to have massive risk to get high upside potential. I think you can have really high upside potential with very little risk. So what I'll do now is I'll explore things on more of sample data. I will actually try things out, test for proof of concept, check in with myself to recalibrate. How did I feel about the outcome of this? Was it what I was hoping for? How was it different? And if it's not something I'm really going to want to pursue, I'm going to actually backpedal long before I invest way too much time and money into it. And that could be under somewhat considerable levels depending on who you are. I mean, for me, I had a business that I recently invested $50,000 into. That business well outperformed what my initial expectations were on year one. It doubled this year by the end of December for year two. And because it was performing so well, by the third quarter of the second year, we went ahead and threw $300,000 into that business. I could have easily done that from the beginning using tools like yours. The $50,000 actually came from a home equity line of credit debt weapon initially. And it initially, in just year one, produced for me $70,000 in returns with extremely passive effort. So I was able to return all the $50,000 originally put in plus 20. Again, this year we've doubled revenues, so that amount has grown even further since year one in terms of my cut. So it was a very low risk proposition for the initial 50,000. Now that we've thrown another 300K in, the risks have grown, obviously. But now I have a lot more data to go off of in terms of how did I feel about this project? Are things working out the way I wanted them to? How is my participation received? And is it stuff I want to keep doing every day from a task basis? And if I hadn't, answered all those questions favorably, I wouldn't have put the extra money in. But instead, the money, it was an easy decision to do that. So in your case, I think that there would probably be ways that you could experiment with other ways of generating revenues without putting a ton of extra money in, especially with a small upfront time commitment.